Good morning. Appreciate everyone's attendance this morning. Is my mic on? There it goes. Appreciate everyone's attendance this morning. And I look forward to bringing you some additional words I have learned on the practice of fasting. In the previous lessons, I brought just more of a historical and some practical application related to that. And today we're going to spend some time in a specific episode in Jesus' ministry in which this topic was brought up amongst with his followers at a time when there was numerous other things going on and this conversation came to pass. When we talk about fasting, what you realize is it's really about hunger. That's what fasting is about. That's what its focus is you fast that elicits a hunger response. And then from that, we're going to spend some time this morning looking at that because fasting is really about eating and the abstaining from it. And with it, in this opportunity that we see in Matthew, we see this conversation come to pass. And we're going to try to work through this idea that Jesus is talking about how fasting changes with his coming. How the focus of everything that was with the old covenant changed with the new covenant. And he took this opportunity to bring this out and to try to teach this lesson to those that were learning of him at this time while he was on earth. So going to the reading, we'll go back and refresh ourselves on this. In John chapter 9, verses 14 through 17, the word says, "Then the disciples of John came to him saying, 'Why do we and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?' And Jesus said to them, 'Can the wedding guests mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast. No one puts a piece of unshrunken cloth on an old garment, for the patch tears away from the garment, and a worse tear is made. Neither is new wine put into old wineskins. If it is, the skins burst and the wine is spilled and the skins are destroyed, but new wine is put into the fresh wineskins, and so both are preserved.'" This question comes up, and I want to bring into context and just discuss a few things about hunger. If you look at me, I haven't ever suffered from hunger, not for any appreciable period of time. But when we look at this, we're going to talk about hunger not only just in a physical sense, but in a spiritual sense. And this is where Jesus is going to direct this conversation. Because I know, me personally, I can remember seasons in my life where I was convinced that if I just got to this next place, if I just got this next project done, if I hit this next milestone in my life, that things were just going to kind of settle down a little bit. I was going to have a moment. I was going to be able to breathe, and that desire and that need to feel like I've accomplished what I needed to accomplish was going to be fulfilled. And maybe you felt that way too. What I've learned after nearly 54 years is you have those moments. You finish that big project. You marry off that daughter. You have all these things that happen in your life that you feel and you've been waiting for. And sometimes you just feel like if I get past that point, things are going to get a little bit more settled. Things are going to be less stressful. And every time, I have that moment that lasts less and less every time it happens. That moment when you feel like you're at ease. But we never really feel that full satisfaction because there's always something new. There's another goal that we need to attain. There's a challenge that is brought up. Another thing I thought would finally make me feel like I've made it. I've accomplished those goals. It's much to me like drinking salt water. You're thirsty, you drink it, and then immediately you just feel more thirsty than you did before. For a moment it seems to satisfy, but it's only left us wanting more. Every human heart has these hungers. What does our soul desire? What do we try to look at? This hunger is something that entertainment cannot satisfy. It's not something that food can fill. It's not something that possessions can remove if we have them. It's nothing that achievements, relationships, any amount of comfort and pleasure can ultimately satisfy. But you see the world spending millions upon billions of dollars trying to achieve these things. But the Bible tells us that hunger was built in us. David cries out in Psalms 42:2, he says, "As a deer pants for flowing streams, so pants my soul for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. Who shall I come and appear? When shall I come and appear before God?" David understood that beneath all of this, life's desires and these deeper things, that there's a deeper longing. A longing to God himself. And why is that? Because it was created in us. Ecclesiastes 3:11 speaks to the fact that our heart was set on eternity. We were made for God, and we were created to be in fellowship with him. We were designed to know him and be with him, to love him, to worship him, and enjoy his presence. Yet something happened. Something went very wrong in that. There's a reason why we feel incomplete. And why is that? Because sin has separated us from God. He's deprived us of that fullness of that relationship. And this hunger we feel each and every day is not just physiological. It's not just psychological. It's spiritual. We have this spiritual hunger. And this ache of the soul that's created for communion with God. But we're separated from him. So then the question becomes, is it not whether we are hungry, because we all are, but what are we truly hungry for? And that's why fasting matters. That's where the focus comes. Fasting takes one of these most basic desires we have, something we have every day, because every day we will feel hunger. And we use it and we leverage it so that every time that happens, the tool of fasting allows us that every growl of the stomach becomes a reminder. Every missed meal is an opportunity for prayer. And every hunger pain just brings us to a deeper question. What do I really desire? What do I really need most? So going back to Matthew 9:14, we'll visit this scene here. And I don't know if many of you have read the book QBQ, The Question Behind the Question. But we're going to take a moment to look at this question and see what it says, because in 14 it says, "Then the disciples, John, came to him saying, 'Why do we and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?'" We're coming on the scene. Jesus has already done a number of different things that have got some people flared up. He's sitting down and he's eating a meal with these tax collectors. So he's got the Pharisees worked up, and they've already had an interchange about that. And now John's disciples come and ask them, but why are they asking this question? And the more I looked at it and thought about it, there's a weight of things going on here that if you don't think about it and realize the context of it, it becomes a little bit more clear why this question probably was asked. Because the truth is John's followers, their leader, he's no longer preaching. He's no longer in the wilderness out proclaiming things. He's not baptizing people for repentance in the river. He's in prison. He's locked up. His future is uncertain. Those followers' futures of what's going to happen to their leader that they've been following is uncertain. This faithful prophet that announced the coming of the Messiah who they believe they're watching here now. This prophet that said he was preparing for the way for the Lord is no longer making that proclamation. He's sitting in a prison behind stone walls. His disciples are worried. They're concerned about him. They're uncertain about what's going to be happening with him. He's suffering there in prison. Their future feels very unclear. Their hope is being tested. And while they're processing all this, while they're day to day concerned about these things, they look over and they look at the Messiah and they look at his followers. And do they see him mourning John being in prison? Quite the opposite. Instead, they see him feasting. He's having dinner. They're eating together. Instead of carrying on this solemn mood that John's disciples were obviously feeling, he's there with his disciples, and there seems to be joy in everything that he's doing. And wherever he goes, he's bringing joy with him. We have the added tension of the Pharisees who've also been looking at him, and they're sitting there and they're fasting. Because we look at the context of this, we realize that the question says, why do we and the Pharisees fast? John's disciples are fasting. They may have been doing it that very day. The Pharisees themselves may have been doing it. They had their traditions, and that was what was going on. So for a moment, two very different groups are allied together looking at this event and asking this question, why are they fasting? Why are the grieving disciples of John asking this question? The rule-keeping, legalistic Pharisees, both are confused. Both are looking at his disciples. And both are asking, why are your disciples not fasting? Why are they acting so different than what we expect? Because that really becomes the question in all this, is that why are you not doing the things I'm expecting you to do? Because Jesus is systematically decoupling everything that they expected the Messiah to be and all the things that he was going to bring. Why was he so different? Why don't they act, his believers act like he expects them to act? Why is Jesus not fitting into the box that we have presumed that the Messiah was going to be? And that becomes really the deeper question. It's really not just about fasting. It's just the issues that Jesus himself is bringing to them. He's disrupting the norms. He's bringing something new. And he's forcing people to rethink everything that they thought they knew. Because something new is happening. And Jesus is about to take that question, he's about to give them a response and tell them why. So he begins and gives them this image of the bridegroom. And as the wedding, and he asks this question after he is asked of that, is asked of them, can the wedding guests mourn as long as the groom is with them? It says in 15. And Jesus pauses and he gives them this picture. You know, I've never been to a Jewish wedding, but I'm understanding they're probably a little bit more dramatic than my weddings that I've given. It's definitely not a funeral. It's not a place where you're having a day of silence. It's not a day of mourning. The wedding day was a day of celebration. It was a day filled with laughter, conversation, music. It was a joyous times. We imagine that we enter into this wedding feast. The tables are overflowing with food. There's friends and families gathered together. Children are running around. They're interacting with the crowds. Conversations fill the air. The sounds of celebration echo from every corner. There's the aroma of fresh food. Cups are raised. Voices are lifted. There's people embracing one another. Every face is reflecting on the happiness of this occasion. And in the center of all this, he brings forth the bridegroom. His presence coming into this changes everything. No one's counting calories. No one's talking about depriving themselves of things that day. No one definitely is focusing on fasting. That's the furthest thing. A feast is the opposite of a fast. No one's walking around in sorrow. Why? Because the bridegroom has come. And we can take that and we can look at that illustration and say, well, that's good. But there's a more powerful statement behind this illustration that if we realize that he's saying his presence has changed everything because he is the bridegroom. Because he's telling them, and with that, the statement becomes even more remarkable. Because as a Jew, when you hear this allusion to the bridegroom, we are then taken back to Old Testament, where God repeatedly describes his covenant relationship with his people as a marriage. Isaiah declares, "For your maker is your husband," in Isaiah 54. Hosea records in 2:19, "I am betrothed to you. You will be betrothed to me forever." And Jeremiah uses the same kind of covenant language when he speaks of God and his love for his people. So when Jesus calls himself the bridegroom, he's just not giving a story. He's declaring who he is again, that he is far more than just a covenant illustration. He's making a profound statement about his identity. The Messiah has come. The bridegroom is here. The one generations of Israelites have been waiting for has arrived. And if we look back in chapter 8 and in before chapter 9, we see Jesus continually showing opportunities of his authority and who he was and bringing those things forward, and he continues it with this illustration. But the reason why they're not mourning is because he's there. They're not mourning and fasting because the bridegroom has arrived. Anticipation has given way to presence. Why should they fast? As though they are still longing for the Messiah when he's here, he says to them with this statement. We can see them with our own eyes. We can hear him with our own ears. And we can sit at him with his table. The answer of the good news has come. The one who will deal with sin that created our spiritual hunger has come, is what he's saying. But we go from that, and that joyful and that beautiful imagery of looking at that feast. And as joyful as that image is, just as then he makes a surprising statement. Just as they start to try to contemplate what he's saying, related to why his followers are celebrating, Jesus introduces another note of sadness. The wedding feast will not last forever. The bridegroom who has come will one day be taken away. He says in verse 15, "But the days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast." He says this, and a shadow, I can almost feel, kind of drops. He's talked about this celebration, but he says that celebration is going to end. Jesus is already pointing towards the cross. He's already getting them prepared for what is to come next. The disciples don't understand it. That Christ is going to be crucified, that he will die, that he'll be buried, that he'll be raised again, but then he'll ascend back to the Father. He's telling them to be prepared. There is going to be a time for fasting. There's going to be a time for longing for him again. We know Christ. We possess his Spirit, yet we still await his visible return. The Christian life exists between these two events. First, Jesus coming and his coming return. And that longing for those times changes what fasting is for us. We can almost hear it to the point of saying that all these changes are coming. What are we talking about? Is this fasting going to change? How much is it changing? Is he simply making a small change to a long existing practice? Is he offering some new interpretation of the old tradition? Then Jesus goes and he brings this next illustration. The change that he's describing is not small. It's much bigger. It's much broader than just fasting itself. Because then in Matthew 9, 16 and 17, Jesus explains it this way. No one puts a piece of unshrunken cloth on an old garment, for the patch pulls away from the garment and the tear is made worse. Nor do they put new wine into old wineskins, or else the wineskins break. The wine is spilled and the wines are ruined, but they put new wineskins into new wine into new wineskins, and both are preserved. Matthew 9, 16 and 17. He gives these two illustrations. I'm not a seamstress, and I don't know anything about patching things, but evidently there is a truth to the fact that you can't take two different types of material and sew them together and then expect that they're going to do well when you wash them. And he's talking about this, and this was something known. And also, again, with wineskins and wine, and putting new wine into an old wineskin, the fermentation process would cause it to burst, and so that was practically not something we can do. And they would have understood those illustrations. But I think for us, in practical terms, imagine you're trying to navigate modern Los Angeles with a Rand McNally Atlas from 1950. There's nothing wrong with that map in 1950. It was a good map. It did what it was supposed to do, but you try to translate it forward into today, it doesn't. The highways don't look like they did in 1950. The neighborhoods don't look like they did in 1950. The old map is simply insufficient to do what it was designed to do. And he's telling them that the way in the covenant of old is being replaced with a new covenant. It's not that the old one was bad, because God created it, but he's pointing to something newer, something greater, something improved. The new covenant that Jeremiah promised. And now Christ has arrived to begin that transition. Something fundamentally new has now entered into human history. The bridegroom Jesus is here. And the old simply can't contain the new. So looking at things in that way are no longer beneficial. So what changed? Christ did not condemn fasting. He did not abolish it. In fact, we see, if we look through Acts, the New Testament church, they continued it. What changed was not fasting itself, but it was what was the focus of the fasting. And that's what he's trying to bring forth, because everything is changing. The focus of everything in the old covenant moving to the new covenant is changing. And what's at the center? Now everything revolves around Christ. The Old Testament pointed to the Messiah and his coming. The New Testament believer looks back. We see that Christ has come, and we now look forward to his return. Christian fasting is Christ-centered fasting. That is what he's telling them. Once we understand that, we can understand that fasting still matters. It's not some antiquated thing that no longer has any purpose. It's just changed. Because whether or not we realize it or not, we're still hungry. That has not changed. And every one of us is still feeding on something. Some of us, maybe all of us, at some point feed on success. Getting approval from someone, having some level of comfort in some situation, make some achievement, wealth, entertainment, relationships. The problem is not that these exist or that we have them. The fact is we're using them to fill a hunger that only God himself can fill. Jeremiah talked, and the people, when they were forsaking him and the foundation of a living waters, and they dug broken cisterns that could hold no water. And they keep going back to those and trying to get water, and if there's no water there, we too ourselves have that same problem. We have this emptiness, and we keep returning back to the things and seeing if that's going to fill us up. It's much like someone sitting out in the ocean and they're so thirsty, and they go and they drink some of that seawater. And for that moment, again, as we talked before, it satisfies us for a moment, but then that thirst returns. And then what do? Unfortunately, many go back to do it again and again. Another way of looking at it potentially is just looking at you got a phone. Many of you have had a phone that was well past its life. And you're sitting there and it's not 5%. And you're sitting there and you're turning down the brightness and you're shutting off all the extra apps that are in the background. You're doing all these things. When really the solution to the problem is you need to plug it in. But for us, sometimes we're the same thing. We're running on empty. We have this hunger, and we're just trying to manage things without getting connected to truly plugging in and getting what we need. The problem is about connection. We need a power source. Many of us try to manage our spiritual life the same way. But that raises an important question. So why do we keep doing that? We recognize this, we see it. This hunger returns again and again. Why do all these things leave us wanting more? Why does it keep coming back? The answer is deeper than the choices that we make. It's deeper than the habits that we have. It goes all the way back to why we were created and the relationship that was built within us that we are supposed to have in order for us to be fulfilled. To understand why we are hungry, we need to understand that sin has separated us. So why do we hunger? Well, the short answer is we were created in God's image, as it says in Genesis 1:27. But in Romans 3:23, it says we've all sinned. We've all fallen short. We can't save ourselves. Christ bore all our sins. He became sin for us, as it says in 2 Corinthians 5:21. He died and he rose again. And he's offered us salvation through faith, Ephesians 2:8-9. That through just confession of those sins that we can receive salvation, Acts 2:38. The deepest problem we have is not a lack of discipline. It's not a lack of religion. It's not a lack of effort. The deepest problem we have is sin. We were created in the image of God. We were created to know him and to enjoy his presence. We've all sinned and fallen short. No amount of fasting is going to fix this. No amount of moral improvement and us improving ourselves is going to erase the guilt that we feel. No amount of religious performance can reconcile us to God. That's why Jesus, the bridegroom, came. He didn't merely come to teach us. He came to save us. Jesus lived a life that we could not live. He perfectly obeyed God and all his commandments. He went to the cross. He suffered a death that he did not deserve, and he bore all our sins on that cross and experienced the ultimate judgment that we deserve. He was forsaken that so we could be forgiven. He was condemned so we could be justified. He died that so we could live. Today, salvation is offered as a gift of grace through faith in Jesus Christ. We're saved by this alone. We can be saved by fasting, not by works, not by any performative acts, but by grace alone. Until the guilt that I can feel for things as false fasting is a starving sinner who's hungry for something, attempting to earn God's attention. But a true Christian's fasting is in the cry of a satisfied child of God who says, I have tasted your goodness and I want more. Fasting is a redeemed child of God saying, I know him and I want more of him. That's the ironic nature of fasting in the Christian life. The good news is that the gospel is that we don't have to leave hungry anymore. The very one who diagnosed our problem has provided the cure, and this bridegroom has come. He can satisfy it. Jesus offers something better. In John 6:35 it says, I am the bread of life. He who comes through me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. Jesus said, I am the bread of life, that he is this living water. The world tries to support us, tries to tell us that we can be satisfied with the things that it provides us. But Jesus says, I provide everything you need. Truly, for us to live, we need just bread and water. I think that's something to be said for that metaphor that he brings. Those are the basics of the things we need. And that really changes what fasting's all about, because in fact, if Jesus truly is the bread of life, if he truly is the living water, then fasting's no longer about trying to earn something from God by this act. It becomes a response to that which we've already found in Christ, that we're going to feast upon him versus feasting upon these things. The heart of Christian fasting is not particularly about food. That's the physical personification of it. Christian fasting is not about dieting. It's not about self-punishment. It's not trying to go to God and say, look what I've done. Can I have some favor? Because look at the things I've done. I'm not trying to impress others by saying, look at me. Matthew 6 warns of those things and about public displays. Christian fasting is just another act of worship that we have available to us. It is truly saying, Jesus, you are better than food. You are better than all these things that I'm trying to fill myself with. You in the end are better. Because as we said before, every pang of hunger becomes a reminder of how he's better, how he's more fulfilling. Every missed meal becomes a prayer. Every moment when we're struggling with that, it's us calling upon him to help us, to lean on him, to have dependence on him. It trains our soul to lean on him. It just also reminds us that our physical needs are not our most important needs. We live in a physical world. all these things, all these ideas of things that we think can satisfy us, hunger of food being one of those primary things, is not the most important thing that we need. But it still leaves an important question. If Christ has come, if he's died and he is risen, why do we still fast today then? Why do we fast at all? But we find it in that statement when he says that he's come, but the final wedding feast has yet not happened. Why do we fast? Because we treasure who Christ is and because we've tasted the Lord, and as he says, he is good. We fast because we treasure who Christ is and recognize who he was and who he will be for us. We're fasting because we are waiting. We fast because we know that this world is not the final home. We fast because we long to see the day when faith will become sight. Fasting, in a way, becomes a living prayer. It's a way for us to recognize and remember these things. It's a way of us now saying, it's like, come, Lord Jesus, when I fast, I'm asking you, please just come. I'm ready for you. So what are we truly hungry for, you may ask? Well, if we look at the basics of fasting, we look at it in a superficial case, it's like it's an abstaining from food. We can have the act of fasting, we can put it alongside with prayer, and in fact, there's numerous places we see in Old and New Testament where we see this practice combined together. There's things that are juxtaposed and help us to focus our things. So there's some challenges we can look at for ourselves this week. If you're still exploring, if you're still deciding if you want to be a follower of Jesus, then the question may be, not that you necessarily fast, but you start asking yourself the question, are the things that I'm missing, is this hunger that I have that I cannot seem to get satisfied with anything that I do in my day-to-day life? Am I really hungry for that? Or is this absence the thing that Christ is promising us? This thing that was built into us when we were created by our Creator that we need to feel full and complete. Is it possible to think about that the bridegroom has come, that he's now fulfilled that, and do I want to pursue and know more about him? For those of us that already are followers, then it becomes a question of, so what does that look like for us? I'm not proposing you just merely skip a lunch and say, there we go, I've done it. That's not what this is about. It's taking that moment. If you do skip a meal, do you take that moment, you look at it, and you intentionally set aside time to say, I'm going to focus my time, energy, and effort on Jesus in those moments. I don't know what your lunch breaks look like. Mine are sometimes 5 minutes, sometimes they're 5 seconds, it feels like. But if you take those intentional times, look at that, don't merely skip it, but turn that hunger into time of prayer, time of contemplation. And throughout the rest of the day, as your stomach is empty and it growls, take that moment to say, come, Jesus, come. Turn that into a moment of focus. And for those that have been in the faith even longer, maybe you do a little bit more. Maybe you skip one meal, you skip 2 meals. And you're not doing it, and remember, you're not doing it to impress God. That to me is, I think, one of the key things we have to watch. We're not doing it in order to earn favor. We're not trying to prove that we're spiritually something. But it's truly about taking the time to express a longing for him. Let every hunger pain become a prayer. Come, Lord Jesus. Because truly, at the point of all this is pointing towards a future day. Looking for that day when Jesus will come again. And if we look in Romans 19, we recognize that we've started this with a feast. We've talked about fasting, but we started with the feast. And at the end of all this, Romans 19 points us back to that. But if one thing you hear this morning is understand that this hunger exists that we have because we were made that way by God. The gospel and Jesus and the bridegroom coming restores us back to that relationship. And that fasting is a means of teaching us to long for him and know that he is the answer. The final feast is coming, as we said in 19, this marriage supper and the supper of the Lamb. And Jonathan spent some time on this in different times, and I won't go into all the details, but the reason we fast is not because we're pessimistic about this world. We fast because we're hopeful for the new world that is to come. We fast because we know the story's not over. We fast because we know the bridegroom is coming back. And Revelation gives us a glimpse of this mighty feast that is coming. He's coming again, and one day, this fast from him, from Jesus himself, will end. And one day, faith will become sight. One day, the church will join the marriage supper of the Lamb. And every longing heart will be satisfied forever. And until then, every Christian fast whispers the same true words. Jesus, you're better. You're better than comfort. You're better than success. You're better than approval. You're better than any security we could feel in this life. Where Jesus, is better than anything this world can offer. And so that when we fast, we take that time to separate ourselves from that worldly feeling and need, and we fill it by feasting on who he is and spending time with him, because he is better and will always be better than what this world can offer. I appreciate your kind attention this morning. I hope that this message gave you some things to gnaw on and to think about related to fasting. It is not a tradition of something that we do a lot in this country. It is still seen in other countries. But it's something I think it would just spend some time and focus on and thinking that it's the time that we can spend and carve out to reflect on Jesus and to take that physical representation and those physical needs and plug into it a time where we remember him. If anyone here has a desire to make a relationship with Christ, we offer that this morning. If anyone is interested in learning how to get better connected and become a member, you're also welcome to come forward. We can assist you with that as well. And those of us that have been here and you're sitting here today and you're going, I'm just not fully satisfied, well, maybe it's because we're just not focusing on something that's better. Because Jesus is the better thing. We can pray with you, we can help you in those struggles. We do that now as we ask you guys to stand as we stand and sing.